From the Grow Louisiana Coalition, I'm Jennifer Crockett, and this is Making Energy, a podcast where we discuss the most important issues facing Louisiana's economic engine and working coast. 2023 marks a new stage of the oil and natural gas industry, fueled by unprecedented American investments offshore and on land. It's an energy evolution.
The energy industry as a whole is Ducks Unlimited's largest private investor. And we know that the work that we're doing makes a difference.
The promise? American-made, reliable, clean, and affordable energy built with infrastructure vital to the working coast. Louisiana is the key.
We all have a similar goal in mind, I think, is to, again, conserve and preserve what the natural resources here in this state provide for us.
On this episode of Making Energy, we welcome two guests to talk about Louisiana's working coast. For our first guest, that has everything to do with water, wetlands, and wildlife. Bob Dew is joining me now. He is the Senior Director of Development for Ducks Unlimited. Ducks Unlimited is the world's largest nonprofit organization dedicated to conserving North America's continually disappearing waterfowl habitats. More than 1 million supporters have joined Ducks Unlimited on this science-guided journey to fill wetland skies with waterfowl today, tomorrow, and forever. Since their work began in 1937, Ducks Unlimited has conserved more than 15 million acres. Bob not only works for Ducks Unlimited, but he's also been one of their tireless volunteers for the last 20 years. He's a scientist with a bachelor's in wildlife management and a master's degree in wildlife and fisheries science. Welcome, Bob, to Making Energy.
Thank you, Jennifer. That 20 years doesn't seem like it's been as long as it has. So
goes by quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Well, first, Bob, can you describe what you do for Louisiana's working coast with your role at Ducks Unlimited?
Yeah, so the first half of my career I spent as a waterfowl biologist, and I managed all of Ducks Unlimited's conservation projects in coastal Louisiana. For the last 10 years or so, I've actually been in the fundraising side of Ducks Unlimited, raising philanthropic dollars for our work here in coastal Louisiana.
And that includes the energy industry. Louisiana's energy industry spends more money on coastal restoration and protection than any other private investor. As a scientist, what impact are these investments having on our coast?
Investor is a good term to use. The energy industry as a whole is Ducks Unlimited's largest private investor. We know that the work that we're doing makes a difference. There was a recent report put out last year in 2022, and it really highlighted the decline in migratory bird populations as a whole, in some cases 40 to 50%. But one of the bright spots of that report were that waterfowl populations had not declined during that time period. In fact, some waterfowl populations have actually increased, as much as 30% in the last 50 years. And the partnership aspects of that are really, really critical.
Ducks Unlimited is currently working with energy industry partners on projects to protect more than 900 species of wildlife, to be able to winter 10 million waterfowl along the coast of Louisiana, to also provide clean water and reduce flood impacts all across South Louisiana. Bob, could you tell us a little bit more about these projects and what you are most excited about?
Ducks Unlimited, we have a robust staff of biologists and engineers that lead our conservation delivery. Here just last year, Ducks Unlimited completed a project down in Plaquemines Parish, which was right across the river from Buras, Louisiana. It was called the Baie Denise Freshwater Introduction. Chevron was a critical partner in the Baie Denise project. Today, when you go to that site, it's actually built land, and it's really that submerged aquatic vegetation is kind of the foundation for the food chain in the marsh. That's what the ducks are there after to eat. That also provides food for fish and shrimp and crabs and all the things that make a living in the marsh. ConocoPhillips is really one of our bigger partners in coastal Louisiana. They own about 600,000 acres of coastal wetlands. And we actually have a Ducks Unlimited staff person that works in their office in Houma. So we're able to partner with them on a number of projects, particularly in Terrebonne and Lafourche Parish. Another project was down in Vermilion Parish on White Lake wetland conservation areas to help get water off of that marsh during storm events and other high rainfall events. Chevron basically funded that project almost entirely. And another project was in St. Bernard Parish, about 25,000 linear feet of terraces that's going to benefit about 300 acres there on the Moreau Foundation. Valero was an integral partner in that with a $100,000 gift here recently. Also, down in Terrebonne Parish, the 1,000 acres of open water that used to be marsh land that was owned by Apache Corporation, we were able to secure about a $3 million grant to build additional terraces there. I think it's around 80,000 linear feet of terraces. It's going to benefit about 1,000 acres of marsh. We know that the work that we're doing makes a difference, and we're really appreciative of our partners, believing and trusting in Ducks Unlimited and investing in the work that we're doing here.
A lot of exciting work happening along Louisiana's coast. Bob Dew, thank you for being our guest on Making Energy.
Well, Jennifer, thank you for having me.
Our next guest on this episode is also an avid outdoorsman and conservationist. David Cresson joins us now. He's led the Coastal Conservation Association of Louisiana, or CCA, for 16 years. The CCA is the largest marine resource conservation group of its kind in the state. As Chief Executive Officer, Cresson is involved in all CCA does, from advocating for our fisheries to habitat building and outreach. David, welcome to Making Energy.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us about some of the work the CCA is doing to protect and restore Louisiana's wildlife and our coast.
We have more than 20,000 members in the state who are dedicated to conserving and preserving and maintaining our way of life as anglers here in Louisiana. We have an incredibly productive and abundant fishery and a coast here in the state, and it's our job to make sure it stays that way.
How would you describe Louisiana's working coast and also the partnership between organizations like yours and the energy industry who are working together to preserve it?
Well, the working coast to me is Louisiana. It is a way of life. It is our culture. You think about a few things that come immediately to mind. Oil and gas and our ports, but it's much more than that. It is our recreational fishing. Our recreational fisheries here in Louisiana are maybe the best in the world, and so folks come from all over the planet to come enjoy that. Our commercial fisheries, Louisiana is the number 2 commercial harvest grounds in the United States, and people come again from all over the world to eat the food that our seafood harvesters produce here in Louisiana. So the working coast to me is what Louisiana is. It's a way of life. It is our culture. It's the way we're all brought up. If you live in Louisiana, you have a connection to the coast. You either work there, you know people that work there, you depend on services that start there, and without the working coast, Louisiana would not be what it is.
Your organization is tasked with conserving critical wildlife habitats that protect our way of life and support Louisiana's sportsman's paradise. The energy industry is here to create energy for the world. So how do those two things work together?
Extremely well is the answer to your question. We all have a similar goal in mind, I think, is to, again, conserve and preserve what the natural resources here in this state provide for us. If it's the energy industry, then obviously they want to make sure that resource is here for a long time. But they also understand that in order to do that, they need to take care of all of the resources that come from this coast, whether it's our fisheries or our human resources. But on the other hand, let's be honest, we could not do what we do without the infrastructure that is provided by our oil and gas industry. We have 32 ports, I think, in Louisiana. Some of the biggest in the world are right here. But those are not just oil and gas ports. Those are fisheries ports. The services that are really there to provide services to industry like oil and gas also serve those of us who recreationally fish or commercially harvest. The restaurants, the lodges, the fuel docks, the small mom and pop stores that provide services to those industries also are critical to us, and vice versa. Without those small shops and stores and lodges and marinas, the oil and gas industry couldn't thrive either. And so it is very much a symbiotic relationship between the energy sector and the others of us who use the coast as part of our working life.
Almost a decade ago, Shell first partnered with CCA to innovate new solutions to regrow our marsh. You created these floating islands, and they're spawning miles and miles of marsh as we just sit here and talk. It's happening. How is this project working here and also in other areas?
We took recycled plastic bottles and made from those recycled bottles these large mats that we planted native Louisiana plants into. We'd put 400 or 500 plants in each one of these mats, and the mats were designed so that the plants would grow through the mat and into the seafloor. So it's not just a floating island, it becomes part of the natural habitat. And so 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, we did our first one with Shell down in a small community south of kind of Houma called Ile-de-Jean-Charles. And Ile-de-Jean-Charles is a place that is extremely exposed to all of the weather and erosion that Louisiana is so vulnerable to. And so Shell stepped up, worked with groups like CCA and others who built the first floating islands project, and it performed exceptionally well. So well that just a year or two later, we went and did a second phase. And to this day, even after years of terrible storms and continued erosion, those projects in Ile-de-Jean-Charles continue to flourish. If I were to take you there today, I would say you'd have trouble determining which is the natural marsh and which is the marsh that we planted. That's how well it's going.
Let's go. I'm up for a road trip.
Yeah, we can do it anytime you want. But we've done others since. We've done 2 in Sycamore Point with Shell. We've done 2 in the Big Lake area, Lake Calcasieu area, in an area called Prion Lake with Phillips 66. And so all told, we've built a couple of miles worth of linear marsh.
And you're still building those floating islands today, right?
We still do. We are identifying sites for new projects, but frankly, we couldn't do any of them without the help of the oil and gas industry, groups like Shell and Phillips 66 and others who have worked with us over the years.
And it's not just the investment that they bring. They're also bringing a lot of people ready to work, right?
No doubt about it. We could not have done any of these projects. These are get your hands dirty, elbow grease type projects. And so whether it's Shell or Phillips or any of the other companies we've worked with, it's cool to see their employees on a typical workday out in the mud with their hands dirty, on their hands and knees, putting these small plants, not just doing it themselves, but also teaching young students who we bring out to do it with us as well. So it's just good all the way around. And oh, by the way, we're building new marsh all at the same time.
CCA identified more than 900 sites off Louisiana's coast where oil and gas structures have been removed or were about to be removed. They could be transformed into habitats for marine wildlife. These are artificial reefs. With companies like Chevron partnering on these projects, you've already built several of these. Tell us, how do you adapt these structures into artificial reefs, and how quickly do you see them come to life? Also, what is the benefit to the commercial and recreational fishing industry in our state?
This is grassroots work. This is a group of concerned conservationists and anglers looking at what's going on our coast and saying, let's do something about this. And so oftentimes we talk about how we're losing habitat in Louisiana, but there's another really important and really critical way that we are losing habitat in Louisiana. It is the removal of oil and gas infrastructure from the Gulf of Mexico. Just a few years ago, we had something in the neighborhood of 3,500 or 4,000 oil and gas platforms in the Gulf of Mexico. And now that number, after so much has been removed, is approaching 1,000 or so. You are losing critical fish habitat every time you remove one of these structures. It's interesting to me that if you cut an acre of rainforest away, people lose their mind. But we remove this critical fisheries habitat all the time. Every day it's happening, and nobody seems to be as concerned. What's ironic is that reef habitat in a marine setting is more productive, more abundant, more prolific habitat than even the rainforest.
And how are you adding that habitat back in the Gulf?
We've done them in a number of different ways. We have taken old oil and gas infrastructure and put it back in the water. We have built new sorts of structures using 3D concrete printing and created reef structures and put those in the water. We have used recycled concrete from highway projects. One time we took an old high school that had been damaged as a result of Hurricane Katrina and took the rubble from that high school and rebuilt a reef. But what we find is that no matter how we go out and replace this habitat, fish and marine life orient to it very quickly.
You recently built a reef in honor of a young man who was a local fisherman. Tell us about the Jacob Meek Reef.
So earlier this spring, CCA partnered with Chevron and the state of Louisiana and others to build what we call the Jacob Meek Artificial Reef. But what's special and unique about this project is the young man that we did this in honor of. He's a 19-year-old young man who passed away after struggling with epilepsy his entire life. But he was a very passionate fisherman, very passionate about conservation. But we found a way to honor him and continue his legacy at a spot that he had fished his entire life. His dad described it as his favorite place to go fish. It was an oil and gas platform in South Timberleer 165 that had been removed. And so the removal of this platform happened before Jacob passed, and they were upset about it. This was a place that they loved to go with their family and fish. And so we used these fish houses, brought a whole bunch of them on a big boat out to this site, and built this reef in honor of Jacob. And we dedicated it that day with his family. But the really cool part about this story is typically our reefs start showing signs of life within a short period of time, and it might take a little time for the real sport fish to show up. But in this particular case, for whatever reason, maybe God was looking down on us, his family went out to the reef site just 2 weeks after we built this project, dropped their lines down, and within 30 minutes had caught their boat limit of beautiful red snapper. It was one of Jacob's favorite fish to catch. And so Jacob was looking down on us throughout that process.
The healing effect of fish houses, that's pretty cool.
No doubt. It was one I'll never forget.
What is CCA up to this year, and what do you see on the horizon that can capitalize industry's investments in your mission?
So we've already done 6 artificial reefs in 2023, which is a great pace for us. But we've got 4 more that we are doing towards the end of 2023. All of them will be in partnership with oil and gas companies and members of the energy sector. An interesting sort of new endeavor that we're looking into is the role that artificial reefs play in carbon sequestration. And so there's new research that has come out that seems to indicate that reefs, not only do they provide habitat for fisheries, but they also have a carbon capture quality to them. So if we can eventually get to the point where we're not only utilizing these habitats to create homes for fish, but also to help the environment by capturing carbon, that's just an absolute grand slam for everybody.
Has the energy industry had any interest in joining the CCA on this new venture to try and store more carbon in these reefs?
The answer is yes. We already, again, know that a productive and healthy oyster reef absolutely has a carbon capture quality to it. Now, the next step is do we have that same sort of benefit from these deeper reefs that are in deeper water? There's real research going on across the Gulf Coast, and so the energy sector absolutely has an interest in helping us to develop that technology.
The research and the study aspect of your mission is something that you're also fostering in young kids. The CCA has a new program called STEM, y'all. It's a series of education videos with a famous Louisiana musician as your host. Tell us, who is that host and a little bit about the project?
Shell has collaborated with CCA to create a series of videos called STEM, y'all, featuring Louisiana artist, famous musician Amanda Shaw. And she is just absolutely great in these videos. They are geared towards younger kids, and they are focused on the relationship between STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, in conservation and in the world of fishing. And I would encourage anyone who's listening to this podcast to check it out with your kids.
We'll be sure to link to that in the episode description. David Cresson with the Coastal Conservation Association of Louisiana, thank you so much for being our guest on this episode of Making Energy.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Next time on Making Energy, in the final hours ahead of October elections, Louisiana oil and natural gas advocates unite energy supporters. They're standing up for the industry in the voting booth this fall.
More than 300,000 people are impacted by the energy industry of Louisiana. 300,000 people, if they choose to vote together, can have a tremendous impact in this state.
That's on the next Making Energy.